The Department of Defense is now gone. It's now known as the Department of War. This is about more than just a name change, however. This is a significant move, and I'll be talking about why it matters. Alongside this, though, Trump posted two images that appear to be a veiled threat to Russia. This happens as the president says he's losing patience with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Also, something else just happened. The New York Times just published a piece leaking details of a very secret U.S. military operation focused on North Korea. And there may be a lot more to this than just run-of-the-mill journalism. The timing of this piece, the nature of it, they're both very important. I'll be talking about these topics and a lot more today. I'm the Epoch Times senior investigative reporter Joshua Phillip, and you're listening to Crossroads. Welcome to Crossroads. The Department of Defense is gone. It is no more. The Department of Defense is now known as something else. It's the Department of War. President Donald Trump signed an executive order authorizing the Department of Defense to use the Department of War as a secondary title, technically. And Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, is no longer that. He's now the Secretary of War. Let me show you the White House video on the change for this, with statements from President Trump and from the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth.
We have the strongest military in the world. We have the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest manufacturers of equipment by far.
This name change is not just about renaming, it's about restoring. At your direction, Mr. President, the War Department is going to fight decisively, not endless conflicts. It's going to fight to win, not to lose. We're going to go on offense, not just on defense. Maximum lethality, not tepid legality. Violent effect, not politically correct. We're going to raise up warriors, not just defenders. So this War Department, Mr. President, just like America, is back. Thank you for your leadership and your clarity. We're going to set the tone for this country. America first, peace through strength, brought to you by the War Department.
Now look, that's pretty big. As the Secretary of War states, this isn't just about a name change. He says this is about something else. It's about fighting decisively, not about fighting endless conflicts, as we have been for quite a while now. This is about fighting to win, not just to lose, not just to not lose, really. And also he talks about maximum lethality, not tepid legality. Now, some people might take that and say, what do you mean bypassing tepid legality and going for lethality? Anybody who's fought in America's wars knows you've had your hands tied behind your back quite a lot. Rules of engagement have made it so American troops going back to the Vietnam War, even in recent wars, they cannot fire unless fired upon. If they want to shoot an enemy, they have to call in and ask permission for it. And oftentimes the enemy knows this. They play with it, they mess with it, and they get around it. They know that American troops are basically restrained by all this red tape, bureaucracy, and that American troops have largely not been allowed to fight. We are defensive when it comes to fighting. And if you understand what that means, back to Vietnam, when Congress voted and made it so that American troops in a war that revolved around ambushes could not fire at the enemy unless the enemy shot them first. What was that? That was a defensive strategy. It meant you were on the defense. You're defending yourself. You're not fighting. What does it mean when you fight? It means you see the enemy, you shoot them. You don't wait for them to shoot you first. And as Pete Hegseth says, this is about raising warriors, not just defenders. Also, anybody who knows sports or who plays, strategy games like chess, if you're only playing strategy, you are going to lose. At the very least, you're never going to win. If you're only playing defense, it means you're only defending yourself when attacked. In the end of the game, you're either going to end up losing something or having a stalemate because you have never taken the step beyond defense. You will never win. America now is looking to actually win wars. And I think the real key part is where he says it's about going on the offense, not just being on the defense. That's a very, very big deal. Offense, not just defense. America is now going to actually fight. That is a massive deal. when it comes to how we deal with our conflicts. And presumably, as he's saying, we're focusing on maximum lethality, not just waiting to get shot at before we fight. This is America actually becoming a fighter yet again. This is about America standing up and being willing to fight the wars we're in. Now, another important point, the renaming is more of a restoration of the original name of the department. This is not like some, like solely Trump type thing. It actually used to be called the Department of War. It was the Department of War for more than 150 years. The United States only changed war to defense in 1947, just after World War II. And so we're going back to tradition. America is yet again a war-fighting nation, at least according to the president and the defense secretary. Now, look, on a related point, President Trump posted a couple images on his Truth Social account without leaving a comment. And it's kind of like when Donald Trump was meeting with these, foreign leaders, and he's talking about terrorism, and he says, "Let me show you something," and hands them a picture of their house. And Trump likes to tell this story. He says, the person asks, "Why, oh Mr. Trump, are you showing me a picture of my house?" And Trump says, "Well, you're going to have to put two and two together on that one." Trump just did something very similar to Vladimir Putin, and these posts are actually raising some eyebrows. They seem to suggest a veiled threat to Russia. Let me show you what Trump is showing. First off, this is an image he posted of an American stealth bomber being escorted by 4 F-35 fighter jets, America's fifth-generation jets alongside the F-22. These are being flown overhead when he met with Russian President Vladimir Putin back on August 15th. And Trump also posted this image of himself and Putin standing next to each other, watching those jets fly overhead, escorting, of course, the American stealth bomber. Now, why, oh, why would President Trump show this? Why, oh, why would he do this? Well, maybe like when he showed that other guy this photo of his house, you're just going to have to come to that conclusion yourself. But look, remember the context of this. Pretty recently, back in June, Trump activated an American stealth bomber to fly and blow up Iran's deep underground nuclear facilities. That is the Fordo and Natanz facilities, right? And when Trump was meeting with Putin in August in Alaska, that was a fresh memory. Trump had just used that big plane flying overhead to go and bomb two places that a lot of people thought were completely beyond touch. You couldn't touch them. Nothing could ever be done about it. Trump used that pretty old plane flying overhead with Putin to go blow that thing up. At the time also he was meeting with Putin in Alaska, him having the bomber fly overhead was widely regarded as Trump issuing a not so subtle threat to Putin, saying you have two choices. You want the gold or do you want the lead, so to speak. Now remember, what's really not happening in the war between Russia and Ukraine is also this. Ukraine, like the United States has been for a very long time, is purely on the defense. They're only allowed to be defensive. They're not allowed to fight. They're not allowed to be offensive, right? They're not a war-fighting nation right now because they're being restrained by other powers. They're basically only allowed to defend themselves when attacked. They've been heavily restricted from any real damaging strikes deep into Russia. That restriction may not be forever. Trump is now suggesting that he may change something, right? They're already allowing some deep strikes into Russia. It's very limited. That could soon change if Trump decides to give Zelensky the tools, the weapons to carry out deep strikes. But also right as Trump is posting these images, he's also saying something else. Trump says he is losing his patience with Putin. And what else is happening? Well, this may be the most telling of all of Trump's postings of those two images. What's also happening is this. The 50-day deadline that Trump gave Putin to, bring an end to the war, those 50 days are up. It just expired. And that means that Trump is now expected to do something. The big question is, will Trump put his money where his mouth is? Was that just an empty threat? Did Trump say, okay, 50 days, and if you violate it, nothing is going to happen? Empty talk from America. Don't worry about it. When do we ever do anything? When we count to 5 and you don't listen to us. It's again like a parent who says, don't make me count to 10, don't make me count to 5. And of course, they never get there because punishment is not a real thing. Is that what Trump is going to do? Well, it does seem that Trump is suggesting at the very least that an American military response is on the table. Trump is now saying 50 days are up. Let me show you a nice little picture. You can decide what it means. Now, notably, Trump also posted this headline from CBS News. He posted this, quote, Trump commits to pursuing Russia-Ukraine peace. They are not ready yet, but, quote, something is going to happen. So maybe as Trump is suggesting by posting this without comment, quote, something is going to happen. We shall see, right? Now, also something else just happened. The New York Times just published a piece leaking details of a top-secret U.S. military operation focused on North Korea. And this national security leak from the New York Times involves details on a Navy SEALs operation that went bad. And I'd say, well, there may just be a lot more to this than normal run-of-the-mill journalism. The timing of this piece, the nature of it, are both very important. Now, first off, as we've seen with hit pieces like this from the New York Times before, and especially with just the New York Times overall, it's possible this is fake news or half-truths. Very often when they do these big leaks, it turns out the story is not totally accurate. It turns out they misframed information. It turns out they misquoted people, took quotes out of context. It turns out sometimes they faked the entire thing, like the Trump-Russia hoax. We've seen over and over again the reporting is not always accurate. Oftentimes when it's big things like this, they tend to stretch the truth in their own interest. But beyond that debate, the timing that they chose to publish this piece could actually impact peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. I'd say it fits into their seemingly modus operandi that they are doing things in favor of the Chinese Communist Party, in my personal opinion. And look, this could also damage Trump's ability to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. What the New York Times just did could actually block peace. And by extension of this, what the New York Times just did could also strengthen the Chinese Communist Party's grip around both Russia and North Korea. Now, is that their intent? Is that what they meant to do? I have no idea. But it seems that the impact of this, the timing of it, fit with that agenda at least, whether they mean to or not. Now, the United States has special operations focused on North Korea. Very secretive operations. This is not entirely secret. It's kind of known, but they do keep it under tight wraps, the details of it. Now, the details on these operations has been leaked, at least one of them. The timing of this leak could actually hint at something a lot deeper. What's important is this. Donald Trump was just suggesting that he may again meet with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. In fact, Trump declared his openness to having a second meeting with Kim Jong-un because remember his first term in office, Trump crossed over the demilitarized zone, shook hands with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, gave him a cassette tape of Elton John's Rocket Man. Yes, your president actually did that. And this seemed they became very good friends, at least for a brief time. Trump took great pride in meeting with the North Korean leader. After Trump left office, American and North Korean relations again deteriorated, as did South Korean-North Korean relations. Trump is now saying he is open to having another meeting like that in order to try to pull North Korea away from the Chinese Communist Party. And Trump also discussed having a meeting like this when he was having the White House meeting with South Korea's president. Now, alongside this also, Trump is also trying to bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, where the North Korean regime plays a very key role. North Korea is sending troops to, again, Russia. They're sending weapons to Russia. But here's the even more important part. Russia and North Korea have a defensive agreement, a new one, by the way. They basically say this: war for either country means war for both countries. And what does that mean? It means that if China goes to war and North Korea gets pulled into it or Russia gets pulled into it because they have a no limits agreement, it means that both countries need to go to war alongside China. It means that if South Korea gets attacked by North Korea, Russia has to support North Korea against South Korea. It means that in the current war where Russia is fighting Ukraine, North Korea is now legally, according to the Russian-North Korea agreement, North Korea is actually involved in that war. And so what New York Times just did comes just days after Putin and Kim Jong-un were in China meeting with CCP leader Xi Jinping for the regime's big military parade, where Trump declared the countries were conspiring against the United States. Now, important timing on this because as Trump is trying to really kind of pull these countries out, New York Times may have just kicked the whole thing over and forced them to stay in. This is why this matters. Now, first off, SOCOM, Special Operations Command, and SOCOR, the South Korean Special Operations Command, they're both actually active in the Korean Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ. They've been active there for a very long time. The Navy SEALs Operation Leak not only shows the leak of something deeply, deeply classified for the United States, but also something that could have been leaked before and wasn't. So the big question is, why did the New York Times time this leak right when Kim Jong-un and Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, were meeting with Xi Jinping? Why did they time this leak right when Trump is talking about meeting with Kim Jong-un? Why did they do it right now? That's a very, very important question to ask. Well, this leak will likely impact Russia-Ukraine peace negotiations. This leak will likely impact Trump's stated plan to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This leak was also timed perfectly for the Chinese Communist Party's interests over those nations and over these conflicts related to defense. It happened right when all of this was top of mind, when all these leaders are talking, and it will likely make peace a lot more difficult for Donald Trump to achieve. Now, look, on another topic, a young woman who was stabbed to death on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina, she is sparking outrage over light on crime politics and a double standard among the corporate media. The woman, Irina Zarutska, was a Ukrainian war refugee. A video shows her being allegedly murdered by a repeat criminal, DeCarlos Brown Jr. Surveillance videos on this are horrifying. It shows the woman quietly entering the train. She sits down in a chair, very subtle, small frame in a chair in front of Brown Jr. He then appears to stir in his seat. As the woman looks at her phone, keeping to herself, Brown is seen pulling out what appears to be a pocket knife. He unfolds it, he stands up, and he swings at her in a very violent motion. The video cuts out. We're not being shown the alleged murder. Horrifying stuff. Brown is then seen in other video pieces walking around different train cars, blood dripping from him, and then removing his shirt, seemingly to, try to, hide himself. Brown was arrested not long after that, and is now being charged with first-degree murder. Now, the case update from the Charlotte Police Department says the woman was declared dead on the scene with an undisclosed number of knife wounds. They're not telling us how many times he allegedly stabbed her. They're not showing us the video of what actually took place, whether people tried to stop him, whether they just sat there and watched. It notes the investigation is ongoing. Now, most of the establishment media has been utterly silent on this killing. And that silence has sparked viral outrage on social media. People are furious. One of the few stories that has come out actually does the opposite. One of the few stories among the big corporate media actually talks about how MAGA influencers, quote unquote, are talking about this story and why they're mad about it. Some of this has pointed to double standards among news outlets, though, on interracial violence when the victim is white, because as we saw previously, anytime you have interracial violence, it is a national issue. Anytime a white person kills somebody or does anything that is against another race, if they say so much as a racist word on video, it is in every major news outlet. Everybody's talking about it. You have American public officials, local government officials condemning it. You have people kneeling in the Capitol wearing slave scarves, ironically. You have this. Anytime there's violence that is interracial, it is a national outrage, except when the victim is white. And that's what the big thing is at right now. Others have raised comparisons to the case of former Marine Daniel Penny, because Daniel Penny, alongside two other men at least, restrained and placed Jordan Neely, a crazy homeless person, in a headlock in 2023. And that was because Neely, like Brown allegedly, was looking like he wanted to kill passengers on the subway. Neely was threatening to go on a killing spree. He was threatening violence. Other passengers on the train were so terrified by what he was saying that they restrained him. Neely died. Penny was put on trial before being found innocent. And so while people accuse him of killing him, no, he was found innocent before a jury. But the incident is being mentioned again, given that in the recent killing of this Ukrainian woman, it does not seem that other men on the train did enough to stop the murder. We don't know if anything was done. The video is not being shown to us. We don't know if people tried to restrain, allegedly, Brown. We don't know what happened with this. But it does seem the murder was allowed to take place. There were people on that train. Why did they not do enough to stop that young woman from being stabbed to death? This is raising concerns also that when people stand up against violence and murder, they put themselves in danger, not even against the murderer, but against the media. The media attack the people who stand up and try to stop violence from happening. If a person tries to stop a murder, if a person stands up and tries to restrain somebody about to kill a young girl, that person who stands up is more likely to be attacked by the legacy media than the murderer himself. They're more likely to face serious criminal charges than the murderer himself, as we've seen over and over again with the revolving door of light on crime policies. And the issue of serious criminal charges, well, it's another key point of contention. While Neely was faced with murder charges and had his reputation utterly tarnished, dragged through the ringer, protests on the streets, public officials expressing outrage on this, people condemning him because he dared restrain a crazy guy saying he was going to murder people, it turns out the accused man in the murder of the Ukrainian woman is a repeat criminal. He's a repeat criminal who has been let off the hook over and over and over again. In fact, the Daily Mail reviewed police records and found that Brown Jr. was a serial criminal who has been allowed back on the streets repeatedly. His most recent encounter with police happened in January, at least that we know of, when he called 911 and he told the police officers that someone had given him, quote, man-made material to control his actions. He expressed concern that he was not fully in control of himself. We don't know the details on it, but that's telling. Under normal circumstances, if the individual himself, who is a repeat criminal, calls police because he is afraid he cannot restrain himself, in most societies, you put that guy in a crazy house. You put them in a facility because they have admitted by their own words, because they're afraid of themselves, that they're going to do something and not have control over themselves. He was allowed back on the street. And he was allowed back on the street despite ongoing crimes. He spent 5 years in prison for a 2014 armed robbery. He was set free in September 2020. In 2021, right after that, he was arrested again, this time for assaulting his sister. That very same month, he was arrested for injury and to personal property and trespassing. And he then returned to that same address and then damaged the front door. He was arrested again in July 2022 for domestic disturbance. His criminal career, because he's a career criminal, goes back to 2007 when he was still a minor. His other crimes include felony larceny, robbery with a dangerous weapon, communicating threats, as happened with, again, the individual who was choked to death or choked on the subway and then died afterwards. He was not murdered again by Penny. Communicating threats, meaning he was threatening people. Nothing was done to stop it. Most of his charges were dropped. the revolving door of the criminal justice system, which seems to have favor over criminals. Not again of people who try to stop criminals. Now, at the time of his alleged murder, this Ukrainian woman, he was out on bail with a pending trial. If he was not out on bail, if he was not released with this, again, light bail policy, that woman may still be alive. It's also timely on that fact, too, given that bail reform is becoming a nationwide issue. Again, the big issue right now is a person commits a serious crime, they go in, stand before the judge, and they're let free on the streets instead of being held, because a lot of people say that bail is racist, bail is discriminatory, bail somehow allows people to, get off the hook if they have enough money. Not the idea of why we have it in the first place, which there are some people who are dangerous and should not be wandering around on the streets when they might hurt somebody or murder somebody or stab a young woman to death on a subway. Now, Donald Trump is also pushing to use the National Guard and federal law enforcement to deal with crime in states accused of letting criminals run free, and this will probably also assist him if he chooses to talk about it. We'll see what happens. Now, on that front, also allowed one more thing. People are outraged about this. People are very, very mad about this because it ties into a few issues, right? On one side, it ties into the, bail reform issue. Should we be allowing people who commit crimes to be released without bail? Should they be allowed to roam the streets? Another big issue is the partisan debate over whether you should federalize law enforcement, because as we've seen in different areas, well, not enough is being done to stop violence. Chicago, Portland, a lot of areas have large amounts of murders. President Donald Trump says he can fix it. The states and cities are trying to stop Trump from doing that. We've seen now that Trump deployed the National Guard to Los Angeles. We saw now that Donald Trump deployed again the National Guard and also federalized Washington, D.C. and ended a lot of the murders there. Is that a working model? Do we actually want that? Well, this case is becoming really a rallying cry among that movement. The other big thing that's happening is people are talking about the double standard in the mainstream media. People are saying, look, every time there's an interracial crime, you organize mass protests. Every time there's an interracial crime, you try to demonize an entire group of people, usually white people or police. Every time there's an interracial crime, you make it sound like it's the worst thing that ever happened. But when a young, helpless woman is senselessly murdered and the races are different, you seem to not care about it. Why is that? That's a fair question to ask. But I would also give one more comment on this, which I've seen quite a few people talking about as well. Hatred goes both ways. Hatred is like a virus. Hatred is a disease. It's very easy that when you've been the victim of hatred, when you've been the victim of unfair accusations and unfair labeling, when you've been the target of these things for years, and suddenly you're the one in the opportune position and the tables turn, it's very easy to do it back to the other side. It's very easy to become the same exact thing that attacked you. Hatred is like a disease. It infects the hearts of people. And of course, people are now also making this a race issue. I believe that we've been brainwashed by the mainstream media to look at things through a racial lens. I believe that we've been conditioned to view everything as a racial issue. For a long time, that was the agenda. For a long time, that was the agenda among the mainstream media and among, race movements and among what was being taught to kids in schools and pushed on us every single day. We were conditioned to look at everything through the lens of race. And I would say that if you understand communist movements and the idea of why they do this, they want to spur hatred in order to divide societies. And I would say while it is easy to say, you hated me, I'm going to hate you right back. You wronged me, I'm going to wrong you right back. I would say don't let your heart be infected. Don't let yourself become like the thing that hated you. Don't let it drag you down, in other words. I think it's important to recognize when something terrible happens. It's important to recognize when a wrong has been done. but don't let yourself become the evil that you previously recognized, in my personal opinion, of course. And so I'd say don't let your heart be infected with the disease of hatred that has been pushed on society. Don't become the thing that you previously recognized was evil, because I think there is a big movement right now also pushing for that. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into a conversation. Veteran Meme Machine, you're saying in an age of disinformation, the Department of War says it all. No subterfuge, no fluff, just a warning to all who would harm America. Yeah, you know, when I first saw that Trump was renaming the Department of Defense to the Department of War, an important, technically, he gave it a secondary name. So that means that, if the next president comes in or the next Secretary of Defense comes in and says, you know what, I'd rather be called the Defense Secretary, not the Secretary of War. Okay, I'll go with that. What Trump is doing, I think, is he's saying that Trump is suggesting the Department of War label was a quote-unquote woke, kind of like progressive renaming that redefines what America stands for. It's this, limp-wristed, we're not here to fight type thing. No, if you have a military, it's because it's there to fight for you, right? We're not fighters, we're defenders. We're not going to be the meanies on the football field. We're only playing defense this game, boys. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to fight. We're here to fight a dang war. We're going to win, right? It goes back to what Patton said. Anybody know that famous line from Patton? People say the greatest honor in the country is to go and die for your country. Die for your country. He goes, no. We're not fighting to die for our country. We're fighting to make the other guy die for his country, right? That's how you fight a war. You make the other guy die for his country. That's what war fighting is. Not go become a martyr on the battlefield. No, let them become the martyrs, right? Let them become the remembered heroes, and we'll assist them on that journey. That's why we fight a war. You don't fight to go and die. You fight to go and make the other guy die, right? And so it is a big difference in how we look at war. For some reason, America has become ashamed that we're so good at making the other guy die for their country. This is kind of ironic. When America rolled in Desert Storm, okay, who remembers Desert Storm? Who remembers leading up to Desert Storm? Saddam Hussein was using like nerve gas on people. There was the horrifying, I was a kid at the time, right? There was the horrifying video of that long line of cars where people were trying to escape, and they used, was it nerve gas? They gas bombed them, killed all those innocent people. It was horrifying. Saddam Hussein was launching Scud missiles at other countries, trying to expand the war, trying to make this a bigger thing. America was full-on Top Gun mode, intercepting the Scud missiles. We had pro-America things everywhere. Everyone was all patriotic. It was like the action movie America time. Everybody loved it, right? At the time, my dad worked for Teledyne Ryan in the lab. He was one of the engineers working on developing. He actually helped develop some of the drone technology. They went into wartime production, right? They were a defense contractor. They went into wartime production because they needed to build American weapons. We thought we were going into a full-scale long war. Teledyne Ryan, I think they built the fuselages for the Apache helicopters, and they built the landing gear for the C-130s at the time. And so, they were overtime, working 80 hours a week, We were preparing for a war. Then what happened? Well, we went to war with Iraq and against Saddam Hussein. And what happened? We went in, our fighter jets just annihilated their fighter jets. We destroyed their tanks. We bombed the hell out of them. We knocked out their communications. It freaked them out. And entire like detachments, entire like regiments came and surrendered to the United States. And the entire war was over in like 2 weeks. And here we were like, twiddling our thumbs. Gee, guys, I thought we were going to fight. I thought we were going to have a war on our hands. Turns out we didn't, right? What happened before that? America went to Vietnam. Just like in that war, we were killing the hell out of the Viet Cong. We really were. And then what happened? Well, we decided we were killing them too much. We decided we were winning too hard. And so what happened? Well, the hippies were rallying against the military. Congress, you had the anti-war movement being spurred on by the Soviet Union, notably. Their active measures were actually driving forward a lot of those movements. A lot of the mainstream media were actually working on behalf of the enemy, doing big propaganda puff pieces about communism and the glories of communism, doing big fake tours of the Potemkin villages in Soviet Russia and saying America was the bad guys. And then what happened? Congress voted to say that American troops could not shoot the enemy unless they were shot at first. And so what happened? If an American base was getting mortared by the Viet Cong or by an American actor who went and ran their mortars for him for a photo op, as happened, it meant this. We had to get bombed. Then the commanding officer had to call and ask permission. Hey, can I fire back? We're getting bombed. Can I shoot them back? And it had to go through a big bureaucratic chain of command. And they decided, are you allowed to shoot back at the enemy while they're shooting you? And Americans had to get shot at and stand there while getting shot at until they finally got the call back and said, okay, you have permission to shoot back. Because the Viet Cong read our they were reading our newspapers, which were just blowing the lid on like all of our operations, because they watched our TV and knew that it was blowing the lid on every single thing we were doing. They knew we were not allowed to shoot back at them until we called and got permission. So what happened? While they were shooting our troops, they would fire a few shots, they'd move the mortars a little bit, and then when we finally got permission to shoot back, we would shoot at their old positions when they had already moved. And then they'd wait until it happened that we were not allowed to shoot them again, and they'd start shooting us again. America did not lose the war to the Viet Cong. America lost the war to our own Congress and to the hippies. That's who we lost the war to. Same thing in every other war American troops have fought in, right? It has been that American soldiers have had to fight with one hand tied behind their backs because the fear is we're too good at fighting the enemy. And so the idea that we would change that we are again a war-fighting country, and when we fight wars, we're there to fight and win, not just be on the defense, that's a big deal. So, I do think it's a very big deal that they've now changed the Department of Defense to the Department of War, because, what Hegseth has been talking about has been this problem. Trump's been talking about the rules of engagement. Trump has been talking about not disclosing to the media every single detail of every single war plan so that every single country we're talking about going to war with knows exactly what we're doing at every single moment. They're talking about this stuff, and I believe that the changing of the Department of Defense to the Department of War is a recognition of these things. Our troops have been sabotaged by our own, unwillingness to fight and by policies that restrict them from fighting properly. It is crazy that we've put American, teenagers and young men in the front lines of war and then told them you're not allowed to fully fight. Hey, go have fun, kid. To death and glory, right? To death and glory. You go do it now, right? It's crazy we did that to them, in my opinion. Frago, you're saying rules of engagement has always been not allowed to shoot unless shot at first. Insane. You're saying it means you potentially take casualties before first engagement. I know some guys who got around it. I know some guys who've gotten around that, but yeah, it is crazy, right? Yeah, it is crazy. Because basically what it means is you need to let the enemy kill some of your guys before you fight back. I know that talking to Vietnam veterans in particular, a lot of them came back enraged, furious, because a lot of them felt that basically the guys who killed our guys was not the enemy. Our guys were being killed by bad policy, by restrictive war policies, and by the anti-war movement that was being spurred on, again, by the enemies of the United States. Mostly the Soviet Union and the Chinese Communist Party, who was, both of whom were working with the Viet Cong. It's crazy we allowed that to happen. Ashley from California, you're saying, how do we, and again, it's still happening, right? It's still happening to American soldiers and Marines and troops. Ashley from California, you're saying, how do we determine the difference between freedom of the press / freedom of speech and possible treasonous acts? I've been thinking about this because, how should I say it? As a journalist, I can tell when a media is acting in foreign interest, frankly. A lot of news outlets act in the interest of America's enemies, the biggest one being the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of media run stories heavily in the interest of the Chinese Communist Party against the United States. Now, is that an issue of the media itself? Is it an issue of their parent companies having financial interests in China where they want to, curry favor with the CCP for their own business interests? Is it an issue of their shareholders wanting to curry favor with the CCP because they're invested there and they're forcing policy at the businesses? Is it an issue of them not wanting to lose their visas in China? And so they want to, lick the boots of the CCP and, suck the toes of the CCP officials because, again, they don't want to get kicked out of China? Maybe. Is it an issue of the individual journalists themselves or their family members being part of Chinese Communist Party front operations, which Epoch Times has actually exposed that happening at some media? Is it an issue of the heads of the company meeting with Chinese Communist Party officials in closed-door meetings, getting weird business deals right after, and then shutting down coverage of sensitive topics the CCP doesn't want covered? New York Times did that, by the way, when the former head of the company was meeting with Jiang Zemin, and they shut down all their coverage of the persecution of Falun Gong. Interesting, right? Yeah, I would actually say that media who do this are at the very least complicit in human rights abuses. And I do believe that when the CCP falls, which I believe it will, and the truth of human rights abuses come out, the media who worked with them should be held equally liable for human rights abuses and crimes against humanity. I really believe that. When they had the tribunal in the United Kingdom about organ harvesting, and they found the Chinese Communist Party is harvesting the organs of prisoners of conscience and religious believers. They say the main group they're killing for their organs are Falun Gong practitioners, but they're also killing house Christians. They're killing Christians for their organs. And they're killing Muslim Uyghurs for their organs. And now they're killing other people for their organs. It was determined by a tribunal, yes, this is happening. This is happening. And I'd say every person colluding with the CCP in the future will be seen as no different from a Nazi collaborator while they were gassing people in death chambers. It will be no different when that time comes. And I would also say that the media who have covered it up, who've made backroom deals with the CCP to not cover it, who've even assisted the CCP in justifying it, yeah, they should all be held liable for it. Every one of them should be held liable for it. And the tribunal actually said that. The tribunal said that not only should the CCP be held liable for live organ harvesting of religious dissidents and other people in China, but that even investors and people doing business in China, while knowing this is taking place, should also in the future be held accountable. Now, when it comes to the media and whether they're acting as foreign agents, it's a touchy issue because for the most part, let's put it this way. There are ways to get around what it means to be a foreign agent, right? So a lot of journalists, a lot of news outlets get a lot of foreign money. A lot of money comes from, advocacy groups in different countries, but it's like through like third-party things. You're not getting money from like the government itself to like act as an agent. You're getting money to promote like maybe it's an individual and they're feeding you narratives, right? And you want that like breaking story, and a foreign spy is feeding you information. Maybe it's like a foreign spy is providing sources for you so you can push the narrative this rival country wants. Maybe it's that you're getting advertising or your parent company. Because remember, most of the media in the United States is controlled by about 6 parent companies, 5 or 6 major corporations. Maybe your parent company or investors is getting, finances and deals from these big, organizations. And because that's your board of directors or something like that, at the board meetings, they're actually advocating for certain company policies in foreign interest. Maybe it's that a journalist has their quote-unquote sources, but their sources demand that they publish a certain narrative, quote certain people, suppress certain narratives, and so on. Maybe it's that they get a lot of business deals. Maybe it's that they get, other engagements and, like speaker fees or something like that tied to foreign interest. And so they're getting financial interest and financial benefits through like backdoor means. The media industry is filthy, utterly filthy with this type of foreign influence. And not even foreign influence, even like just within the United States and in other countries. Even internally, a lot of journalists, they have a lot of these ties. And even outside the journalists, the media organizations have a lot of these ties. There's huge amounts of corporate interest, financial interest, personal interest, parent company interest, just infiltrating the news industry. On that point, science chicky crack, filthy journal animals. You folks crack me up. Anyways, it's a big problem. It's a big problem. And that goes back to why journalists are supposed to, so if a journalist has, it's not that journalists are forbidden from having like side businesses or like, getting speaker fees, but according to like the code of ethics, which you're not like required to follow, but most journalists are, we're supposed to as a type of ethics, you're supposed to disclose it. So you're supposed to say, okay, I have a conflict of interest with this. My media organization has a conflict of interest with this. I have a personal bias with this. You're supposed to disclose it, right? If you were to boil down the code of ethics for journalism, this is basically it. You're supposed to not have special interest that would compromise the integrity of your reporting. And if you do, you're supposed to say it, right? Basically be free from outside influence. And everybody has some influence of some kind. So you just got to tell people, look, this is my conflict of interest. You're supposed to seek the truth and report it, meaning, you're supposed to do your own reporting, not just report rumors. You're supposed to make an effort to verify whether something is true or not. A lot of desktop journalists don't do this. A lot of journalists these days don't do reporting. They're just rumor mills. They just say what the rumor is, which is, of course, why you see me out on the field a lot. I do a show from my studio quite a bit too, but anybody who watches Crossroads knows that I'm often reporting from hotel rooms all across the country. It's because I'm out on the field. A journalist needs to go and verify. A journalist needs to do reporting. Reporting is not repeating. A lot of journalists these days are repeaters, not reporters. That's the reason why we do it, right? You're supposed to check it yourself. If a report comes out, you're supposed to read it. If a video comes out, you're supposed to watch it and then try to verify whether it's real or not. You're not just another step in the game of telephone. You know what I mean? You're supposed to be someone who's a journalist, and that's why you do reporting. And then the third standard is you're supposed to do no harm. You're supposed to minimize harm. And this is something most media does not do these days. As a journalist, according to the Code of Ethics, you can read it in like the Society of Professional Journalism, a journalist is supposed to take steps to ensure their reporting does not harm individual people. And unfortunately, a lot of journalists do this intentionally. I've seen journalists who try to damage the reputation of people because the person that they're going after has infringed upon, their little area. I saw a case one time where a journalist with another media wrote a hit piece on a guy who was talking about information warfare stuff because this journalist was the guy who was doing speaker engagements on that topic and he wanted to destroy his rival. I won't name the media, but I saw, it was one of these woke media. I saw a journalist do that one time and I caught him doing it and I never went out. I don't like doing, I'm an investigative journalist. I think a lot of investigative journalists misuse the rights of an investigative journalist for personal interest and for vindictiveness, or because they want to do hit pieces or something. I am as a career investigative journalist. I've been an investigative journalist since 2008. I am disgusted by the industry of investigative journalism for this reason. A lot of investigative journalists these days are not trying to break stories. A lot of investigative journalists are doing hit pieces. They just do hit pieces. Hit pieces oftentimes have purposes behind them. Sometimes it's what they call black propaganda, or they call it black marketing. And this is not a race narrative, that's what they call it, right? Black marketing, it's like where you have your PR, right? You go out and you do your advertisements and you try to make your company look good. Black marketing is where you try to make your competitors look bad. And there are third-party organizations that sometimes big companies hire, or they leak. They leak it intentionally, of course. They leak it to journalists and have that journalist do the hit piece on their behalf. There's an industry behind it. There's a dirty business behind it. Sometimes news agencies will do hit pieces on their competitors, which is why you see a lot of media doing hit pieces against other media. Sometimes journalists, news outlets do hit pieces on politicians because, they have a partisan political interest and they're trying to destroy the party they don't like. There's a big, filthy, dirty, disgusting business around hit piece journalism. I find it disgusting. It's not how I do investigative journalism. Anybody who's watched my investigative reports knows that I try to actually look at the issues. I try to go in and find out, okay, what's really happening here. As an investigative journalist, your job is what is defined as the this third pillar of the Society of Professional Journalists standard, which is seek the truth and report it. Seek the truth. And when you find the truth, you should not try to alter it. When you find the truth, you should try to look at the different contexts of it. When you find the truth, my theory on journalism, and this is the theory, look, I've been with Epoch Times since 2006. I've been here a very long time. The English edition of Epoch Times, because we were started by Chinese dissidents trying to expose, human rights abuses in China and trying to tell what's happening in China. You know, you could say that's our bias, but I'd say it's a righteous one, right? You know, started by Chinese dissidents to warn the world about what's happening with the CCP because the most media was not reporting it, reporting the truths that most media refused to report. When Epoch Times English edition started, I was among the early. I came in like a year after. You know what I mean? Or a couple years after. I've been here a long time. I remember when the Epoch Times office was not a lot bigger than my studio. You know, now we're like the 4th biggest newspaper in the United States. You know, roughly, right? I helped establish some of our codes of ethics. And in my theory of journalism is this. If you were to take what journalism is, if you were to take all these codes of ethics and distill it, and as part of my research into what traditional journalism is, and when I did this research, I went back and I counted them, I read more than 70 books documenting the history of journalism, going back to the Tang Dynasty of China, when you had the very first, you know, documented newspaper written, and I'd say even earlier, back when you had imperial decrees written on, you know, bronze tablets during the Roman Empire, right? Back when you had skalds storytelling and carrying news from different kingdoms. Back when you had Hawaiian fast runners going from village to village as the emissaries of news. The tradition of journalism can be defined as simple as this. Present what is most accurate. Present to people what is most accurate. And my theory on journalism is that. And that's what I try to do. And that's what Epoch Times notably also tries to do. Because, you know, again, we have a lot of great discussions about what journalism is here. A journalist is supposed to present to the public what is most accurate. And you should not let that accuracy be influenced or altered or warped by any other influence, whether it's personal bias, whether it's financial interest, or whether it's fear. The role of a journalist and the reason people consume news these days, because, you know, partly they want to be entertained, right? The entertainment has entered the news industry a little bit, and I try to be entertaining as well, you know, to be honest. But the reason people watch news is because they want to know the truth. They want to know what's happening in the world. And the most basic role of a journalist, tell them what is most accurate. And again, a journalist is also a storyteller. If you go back to the pre-written news, when you had skalds and fast runners and, you know, the orators of ancient Greece and Rome, you were supposed to not just relay the truth. You were also supposed to entertain the public, right? The ability of oration, right, to be an orator was also part of being a storyteller also. So that's also part of it, right? Last question, Seymour Butts, good old Seymour. You're saying my brother was in special forces and he doesn't talk much about what happened, but he did tell me that story about being fined for not reading his prisoner his rights. I got so PO'd just hearing it. It's crazy, right? But did you manhandle that terrorist too harshly? It's crazy. It's crazy the way Americans are supposed to be. Look, in old societies, soldiers would, like, after war, and I'm talking like the Romans and the samurai, you'd drink wine from the skulls of your enemies. You know what I mean? I'm not saying we should do that, but there was like a celebration in victory. There was a celebration. Gee, we're warriors. Our role is to kill our enemies. You know, like, we lost that. We shame our military. We're like, how dare you, having killed the enemy? Oh, you poor man. How can you live with yourself for fighting for America? How can you sleep at night? Like, we shame them. It's crazy. if you talk to a lot of troops, and they won't talk about this to most people. You talk to a lot of troops, they don't feel guilty about killing our enemies. They don't feel guilty about that. Oftentimes what they feel bad about is when they made a bad call and one of their friends got killed, or some stupid bureaucratic rule got their best friend killed. That's what makes it hard for them to sleep at night. I wish I had not listened to that stupid order that got my best friend killed. That's what makes them not able to sleep at night. I can tell you when I talk to my grandpa, because he's a retired Marine, and he fought in Vietnam. And sorry, Grandpa, I know you watch this show, but hear me out. You're good for this because you told me a lot of your great stories. When he talks about war, he does talk about the problem he had with having to kill the enemy, right? He told me that the first time you have to kill your enemy in war, he says he got mad at me one time when I was a kid for being like, wow, that's so cool. He got mad at me when I was a kid for saying that. He said the first time, he says you puke your guts out. He says you barf because you're so horrified at what you just did. There's this deep moral guilt a lot of men feel. And he says the real scary thing is when you stop feeling that. He says it's scary when you stop feeling that. After some time, when a soldier is on the battlefield and they're grizzled, right? You stop feeling guilt. And what a lot of troops deal with, at least from the ones I've talked to, is not so much that they feel guilty about having killed the enemy. It's that they start to be afraid of themselves. They start to feel bad that they don't feel bad because, society tells them they should feel bad, right? They're made to feel guilty for not feeling guilty, right? And, older societies had a way of dealing with that. Older societies, that's why we venerate heroes. You fought for what we stand for. You fought and you did what you did to defend us against the elements that would undermine what we stand for. You fought not to kill the enemy, but to protect your family, your friends, your society, and what your country stands for. You fought to uphold your religion. You fought to uphold your values. That is why you fought. And yes, through doing that, you had to kill the enemies of your country, but you did it. You did it for a reason, and you should be respected for that reason. You did not, you didn't do it because you're a murderer, right? You did it because you were pulled into a war beyond your powers, and that's part of human society. I think that we guilt them like this, and we don't celebrate victory. We don't celebrate this, and we have a culture that tells them they should not celebrate it. It creates that internal conflict in them where they feel like they should feel guilty and they don't, and they feel horrible because of that. That's why a lot of them feel bad. And I know a lot of guys who suffer PTSD. Sometimes it is just, look, I'm not in a place to preach to anybody about this because I've never served. And I can only tell you what guys have told me, right? What gets to them the worst, again, is when they feel they could have done something to save a good friend and they made a bad call, or they were in a situation where they had a couple options and they chose one option and their best friend got killed. In my grandpa's own words, tears in his eyes, he'd say, I never want you guys to experience what I experienced. So my grandpa talked me and my brother and my cousin out of joining because we were all going to join. All the guys in my family, we all have security type jobs. I'm an investigative reporter. I have police, firefighters, security guys in my family. All the guys in my family chose dangerous jobs. My grandma never liked it, but all of us wanted to join the military really bad. We actually, a lot of us almost joined together, and my grandpa talked us out of it. He told us he does not want us to experience what he experienced. He said he fought so that we wouldn't have to. In his own words, he says, I don't want you waking up at night because you had nightmares about your best friend trying to hold your best friend's guts in his stomach. And that's the image he kind of put in our heads. And that for him, that's his PTSD. You know what I mean? That's what gets him. That's what gives him nightmares at night. And to Seymour's point, the way that you're supposed to deal with that and then treat that terrorist or that murderer or that guy who just killed your best friend, and you're supposed to treat them with kid gloves like a little puppy dog, that's when you victimize our troops. That's when you have American troops come back and they feel resentful. That's when you have guys come back from the front lines going there as this, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kid saying, I'm going to go fight for my country, and they feel they got backstabbed. It's that kind of stuff that makes them, that really causes them a lot of their problems. Like Seymour, you're saying that your brother fighting with special forces, I mean, honestly, if that's a story he told you, that's what stood out to him, right? That he got fined for not reading some, I don't know who the guy was, some guy's rights, right? It's crazy. It's crazy you guys had to deal with that. Anyways, terrible stuff. I'm sorry for the guys that had to deal with that stuff. I do think it's changing, but yeah, to our troops out there who had to deal with this stuff, I'm really sorry you guys had to deal with that. It sucks. I should be honest about it, right? But I do hope it's changing. I really do hope it's changing. Yeah, there are some. I would note one last thing because I know I'm going on and on with this. There are some cultures that glorify the warrior. I believe that America, even though politically we're not, culturally we are a warrior culture. We glorify our warriors. And I'm not trying to sound cheesy with this. And I say this because I've gone to other countries where it's not like this. If you go to I don't want to throw people under the bus, but I'll name a few, right? If you go to a lot of countries, joining the military is not seen as a prestigious thing. In Taiwan, for example, culturally it's not as prestigious, right? You're like, well, are you a doctor? Are you a doctor soldier? Are you a PhD soldier? I'm joking, Asian dad joke, right? It's not a glorified job because everybody has to do it, right? In China, it's not a glorified job. In Russia, it's not a glorified job. If you join the military, it's like you're a peasant, right? In a lot of countries, it's not seen as a prestigious thing to be in the military. In America, if you're in the military, you carry a certain level of respect from the American people. And I know a lot of troops kind of blush at this. They're like, they appreciate it, but I think it's like, oh man, it's a little awkward sometimes, right? Oh, thank you for your service, right? I know some guys they appreciate it, but they cringe a little bit with it, But it's part of our culture. The reason we're like that is because America is a warrior culture. We are a warrior culture. We love our military. As Patton says, Americans love a good fight, right? We do. I can say coming from, again, I'm super mixed race, but the culture, I grew up with a lot of Hawaiian culture. Hawaii is a warrior culture. I grew up doing hula. The guys in my family, we all did it together, right? We all, did the drums and tuetes and stuff like that. I grew up with that. You have some cultures that are warrior cultures. They love it. They love warrior culture. They love fighting. And I think we should, while we should not engage in senseless violence, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'd say that a culture that venerates strength also should understand. Let's put it this way. It is the little dog that barks, okay? It is the little dog, I call it little dog syndrome, okay? It's something I've framed. Do you know the meanest dogs? Okay, maybe pit bulls. I know this. I grew up with pit bulls. We never had problems with them, but I know pit bulls. Okay, let's put it this way. Do you know which dogs have I been bitten by? I've been bitten by a Chihuahua, and I've been bitten by a miniature poodle. I've never been bitten by a large dog. It is the little dogs that are like the mean ones. It's the little dogs always looking for a fight. It's the big dogs that don't really care that much. It's the big dogs who are big dopes and all friendly. For some reason, it's the little dogs that yap. It's the little dogs that always start in trouble. And I'm saying this because it's also the same thing with people, okay? It's the same thing with guys. This is scientific. It's the low testosterone guys who are often the most aggressive because they have something to prove. The guys who really know how to fight, they oftentimes are not like that. They don't really care that much. You find this in martial arts circles. A lot of guys who know martial arts, maybe when they first start, they're more like looking for a fight all the time. After a while, you don't care because it's like, you're more interested in, if you're interested in winning, the best way of fighting is to not fight in the first place, right? I'd say a true warrior culture instills that. But the danger is that you lose the culture once you decide to stop fighting. It's one of those like weak men create hard times create weak men, right? But hard times create strong men. Oftentimes the existence of evil forces good men to stand up. And sometimes the absence of evil creates evil because bad men, people don't feel the need to stand up against evil. It's the irony of the world, right? And so I would say that I believe America should embrace. I think people should embrace warrior culture. I think there's a lot of virtue in warrior culture. And I do think deep down America actually is this. I think we are a warrior culture, which is why we have so much respect for our military. And I personally find it great that I believe we're again embracing that. We're not trying to shame ourselves over it anymore, right? Warrior culture, but we should be a noble warrior culture, not fighting stupid wars. Right? Don't fight stupid wars. Don't have little dog syndrome, right? Have big dog syndrome. All right, everyone, that said, thank you so much for being here. Let me know in the chat what you think. I don't know. Do you think warrior culture is a good thing? Yeah, Seymour says, the old warrior poet, should we embrace that or should we not? Should we be ashamed at our violent nature? I don't know. You tell me. Is there a place for it? You tell me. All right, folks, that said, happy Monday. Join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And as always, thank you so much for being here. Please don't forget to like this video. As always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.